Well, the Seahawks have reportedly dodged a bullet in regards to the injury to starting quarterback Geno Smith. But while the news is good, he is unlikely to play tomorrow at the Seahawks mock game at Lumen Field. What will we see in the mock game? What will I be looking for? Well, that is the focus today on this episode of Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome back to Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. BetUS offers live wagering on all major sporting events, not just the NFL. Right now, they are offering a 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000. Deposits and withdrawals are a breeze, and it's easy to get started. All you have to do, if you're on the YouTube channel, head down to those comments down below. You'll see a pinned comment at the top. Click that link, set up your account, and get started with BetUS. As Seahawk fans went to bed last night, there was a lot of consternation, and the big concern, of course, centered around the health of Geno Smith. He banged himself in practice on Tuesday, banged against a lineman. I think it was friendly fire. Sounds like one of his own linemen, perhaps, because although it was during a padded practice, and it appeared to be a little gimpy the rest of that practice. And then it sounded a little bit ominous when reports came out last night that head coach Mike Macdonald was saying they would have some imaging done on Geno's hip and knee. Now, I felt a little bit better after reading those initial reports when I saw the actual soundbite from Mike Macdonald. It didn't really seem that ominous or that foreboding. And then today, the news breaking this morning, Adam Schefter reporting that the MRI indeed showed no significant damage and that Geno, quote, shouldn't miss any time. Now, he says any time, but, and I haven't seen confirmation of that this morning as I record this, but I would find it highly unlikely that Geno would play in the mock game tomorrow. Even if he shows up if he's at VMAC today and he's feeling better, and they're practicing right now, I think, and, he might be out there as I speak, moving around, doing some things. But I would think just as a precaution, they would hold him out of the mock game tomorrow, especially considering they have two other quarterbacks that can run those reps. And so I thought I would pop in, as I promised I would, and kind of give you my ideas of what I'm going to be looking for. I am going to the mock game. I'll be sitting on the home side, kind of halfway up near midfield. If you're there, swing by and say hi. In fact, I do have an extra ticket that I would be more than willing to give away to a listener or a viewer. I'll talk about that at the end. But the mock games are not insignificant. If you remember last year, it was kind of our first introduction to Devin Witherspoon. Remember, he kind of had a slow ramp up to training camp last year. Had the hamstring injury, and they really, were careful about getting him back into full contact. But I remember early in that game, and in fact, I had it on video and was able to feature it last year in a show. That's not going to happen this year because no video or picture taking is being allowed. But Witherspoon with an outstanding play, full extension, diving to knock a ball away. It was really our introduction to him for a lot of fans. And so someone is going to flash tomorrow. Someone's going to pop in that atmosphere, in that environment. So I thought I would touch on some of the things that I'll be specifically looking for. Before I do, of course, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button. That way you get notification of all future episodes. All the other ways to support the show are down in the description as well. So assuming then that Geno doesn't play tomorrow, obviously, one of the things, the point that highlights what I'll be looking for tomorrow is I'm going to be watching the quarterback play. And kind of framing it in this context. Because Geno has been the talk of camp. We've addressed it on this show with some of the guests that have come on, and Michael Sean Dugar, and G. Scott, that Geno's been outstanding, has taken to this Ryan Grubb offense like a fish to water. Teammates are raving about his confidence level. And as he is himself, and his also stepping more into a leadership role, something Mike McDonald has urged him to do since day one, since he got the job. And so the framework with which I'll be looking at, the mock game tomorrow, just for some clues, isn't necessarily the big picture, which would be, can Sam Howell show us enough to think that he might be a long-term answer here when Geno Smith is done, whenever that is? But more so now, in the here and now, 2024, for a roster that I've been on the record as saying that I think is built to win, and that even moving on from a legendary coach like Pete Carroll, that the edict from ownership to the front office was no rebuild, we want to win now, and that was John Schneider's entire approach to the offseason. And so are the Seahawks equipped to win if anything should happen to Geno Smith? Does Sam Howell look like a winner? Because last year in Washington, he really didn't have the opportunity to win. The pieces weren't in place. They stripped the defense down at the trade deadline, selling off their best players, especially up front. The way Eric Bieniemy coordinated that offense really didn't give him a lot of chance to succeed, basically throwing the ball 70% of the time and hanging Howell out to dry. And so that helps explain why halfway through the season he was leading the league in passing yardage and in several categories, and then ended up leading the league in turnovers and interceptions, in large part, I say, because defensive coordinators facing the Commanders in the second half last season didn't really have to work that hard. Didn't have to be that creative. There wasn't a lot of guesswork. And so, it wasn't exactly the best situation for a first-time NFL starter. But that being said, what Howell showed last year, and we saw it firsthand here in Seattle, is a guy that can make some really dynamic plays. You can put a highlight tape together of Sam Howell's first season in Washington and make the case that is a starting quarterback in the NFL, and a pretty darn good one. You can also put kind of a horror show highlight reel together of him forcing throws into coverage and throwing bad interceptions. And so, we're projecting his individual performance into his current situation, which is a team that we feel like at some point this season anyway, once everything clicks, everybody gets on the same page with this new defense. We think the defense is going to be significantly improved, and we think the offense has enough weapons that if that offensive line can just be passable early in the season, that the offense can score some points. This team can be competitive week in, week out and win some games. Potentially a lot of games, as I've said. And so within that framework, can Sam Howell succeed? And so I'm just looking for those signs tomorrow. Does he take what's in front of him? Does he take what the defense gives him? He's kind of known as a gunslinger, a guy that takes risks, certainly has the arm talent, can make plays downfield. Are we going to see more of the same? Is that who Sam Howell is? Or much like Geno Smith, although it took Geno much, much, much later in his career to figure this out, Sam Howell's still just 25 years old. Can he take the next step and develop to the point that he weans himself off of those higher risk plays? You don't want to get rid of them altogether, certainly. You still want him to be confident and want to take shots and trust his weapons, of which he has many on this Seahawks roster. But is that just who he is, or can we start to see evidence that he can be a more efficient quarterback? We may or may not see some of that tomorrow within the framework of how they run that practice. Now, yesterday he got a shot to run the first team offense as the starter with Geno not practicing. Wednesday was just a walkthrough following the two padded practices Monday, Tuesday, but yesterday was a full practice. And according to Michael Sean Dugar, it was kind of what we expect from Sam Howell. He said he looks like a backup quarterback. There were wow plays, spectacular plays. He talked about some tight window throws down the field. He talked about back-to-back touchdown throws in the red zone period to DK Metcalf, who in both cases was guarded by Trey Brown. So there's a height disadvantage there. And Howell did what any quarterback should do when throwing the football to DK Metcalf in the end zone, gave him a chance to go up and make a play. And so, Dugar raving about some of the throws, but he also overthrew JSN on an easy back shoulder route. He came up short on another throw to DK Metcalf that Trey Brown cut in front of and returned 30 yards for a pick six. So what are we going to see tomorrow? Week one of the storylines of camp, as much as Geno Smith was wowing everybody, I believe one of the terms to describe Sam Howell the first 3 or 4 days of practice was alarmingly inaccurate. He was, by all accounts, terrible the first week. But also, all of those same people who were on the sideline, watching, observing, reporting on practice every day, have also said since the pads went on Monday, he's been a different guy. He's been very, very good. Nearly as good as Geno on Monday and Tuesday. He's the guy that threw that beautiful little corner route to Jake Bobo, who laid out and made that spectacular catch on Monday. So we'll see. Some guys are better game players than practice players, right? It's that term, gamers. Maybe that's who Sam Howell is. Or maybe he's just a young guy that still needs to grow. Also, hey, let's see what PJ Walker can do. Last year at this time, the third quarterback on the roster was Holton Ahlers, who got a lot of run in the second half of the mock game, showed off his mobility, threw a touchdown pass, showed some cool things, but really, as it turned out, had no chance to make the roster and is now out of the NFL. They've set themselves up a little bit deeper this year for the first time in a long time, after largely ignoring the third quarterback spot on the roster for most of John Schneider's tenure as general manager. PJ Walker's a guy who started games in the NFL, won some games in the NFL, has played well. Now, most of the reports in practice are he really struggles with accuracy, but he can make some plays, both with his legs and his arm. And so if Geno Smith at some point this year were to go down, let's see how PJ Walker runs this offense. Is he a guy that would be capable of coming in and keeping the team competitive in the event that something should happen to one and two? And then the question, of course, becomes, how do they protect Walker? Can they get him to the practice squad, or would another team want to add him to their 53-man roster? Or maybe because of Smith's age, and he has had some instances where he was banged up, he missed some games last year with the knee, do they, for the first time in a long time, keep a third quarterback on the 53 just to make sure they're covered? So that'll be fun to watch. And before I go on, look, as I try to describe what I'm looking for at the mock game tomorrow and what I should highlight, we can talk about all of it, right? We could list every single position group. That's the case every year, but more so when there's so many new young players and a new coaching staff. Because this coaching staff, and we're starting to see it, I think, already from some of the reports coming out of practice, it's a clean slate. Everyone's starting at ground zero. And so there are no favorites. As much as Pete used to talk about always compete, there were times, I think more so in the last 5 or 6 years than the first 10, where it seemed like some guys were kind of on scholarship. And there was really nothing they could do to lose their job. And so some of those young players that we would be so excited about that they would take in the draft didn't seem to be getting the opportunities to contribute. It sounds now like, at least to begin with, everyone's going to get a shot. And so that's why I've just kind of picked the 4 or 5 that I really am going to focus on. Now, one thing that I have to discuss is there will be some players that we're not going to get a chance to see tomorrow. It's disappointing, but none of them seem too overly concerning except for potentially one. We're not going to see Abe Lucas out there tomorrow. Still on the PUP list, hasn't practiced yet. There's reports we're seeing him on the field, on the sidelines, not wearing a knee brace, doing some conditioning work with the blocking sled, after practice. There's been pictures of that. He's working towards getting back, but yet Mike Macdonald continues to be very, very hesitant to give us any kind of confident prognosis on a timeline when we might see him back. Now, I do think, and this is interesting too, because we're getting to know Mike Macdonald for the first time and how he deals with certain aspects of being a head coach. And one of those is discussing injuries. Some coaches are absolutely transparent, frank, in your face. They'll tell you exactly how it is. Some are a little overly pessimistic. Some are a little overly optimistic. I think Pete used to be that way, but I feel like in the last couple of years, it sort of swung. The pendulum sort of swung the other direction. But there were always little telltale signs. If Pete used the word legit, you knew a guy was hurt bad. We haven't figured out Macdonald's tells yet. But there have been many instances throughout this offseason where he's addressed injuries and been very, very straightforward. I'm thinking of first day of training camp or first or second day, talking about Jaron Reed being out of going full go, and also Cam Young on that defensive line. With Reed, he said, look, nothing to worry about. He's going to be back in a week. With Young, he said, nothing to worry about, but it's like a 2-week timeline before we see him back, which then we should see Cam Young. I don't think he's done much yet. Maybe after the mock game, maybe next week. But then the way he talked about Abe, maybe Mike Macdonald's MO with injuries is just to be really, really honest. But something's going on with George Fant, who would be the starter in Lucas's place and was signed in large part to be that guy. He can also play left tackle, and so he protects you on both edges. But he hasn't been practicing this week. The first day he missed, most reporters said it appears to be a veteran rest day. I think it was Tuesday that Laken Tomlinson was out at left guard. They called it a veteran rest day. Fant also didn't practice, and so reporters assumed and reported that that was likely the case. But he hasn't practiced since, and it doesn't sound like he's going to play tomorrow. And Macdonald hasn't said a thing about Fant. Don't know if this is cause for concern. I don't recall any indication of any injury throughout the offseason. But it's something to keep an eye on as we head into next week. Because if George Fant is injured, now we're talking about a situation where the Seahawks might have to go out on the market at the very latest at the cut to 53 for all the teams and try to find a more experienced reinforcement. Because the depth behind George Fant then as we get into the third team is now McClendon Curtis, who spent the entire offseason OTAs minicamps as the starting right guard. Undrafted, small school guy out of Chattanooga. Seahawks poached him off the Raiders practice squad at the cut down at the beginning of the season last year. Basically protected him all season long because they were that high on him. Talked him up as being the first team right guard all offseason, even though they drafted Christian Haynes with the number 81 overall pick. But he played tackle at Chattanooga. So they've they kicked him back out to right tackle immediately as training camp started. And so now I think back to that and I wonder, was something going on with Fant from day one, even though he was out there a little bit that first week? For them to make that switch and move him back to right tackle, a position that teams immediately viewed him as moving inside coming out of Chattanooga. Why is that? He's got the length to play right tackle, but does he not maybe have the lateral quickness to keep up with pass rushers? There's something that caused teams, the Raiders and then the Seahawks initially, to move him inside. So we'll see. Obviously, add him to the list. That's a guy I'm going to be watching really closely. If that's the guy they're counting on in the event that Fant goes down, let's see how he does. Because behind him, now we're talking about Mike Jarrell, the 6th-round pick, another small school guy. We're talking about Garrett Greenfield, undrafted free agent, South Dakota State. I'm sorry. Our old friend Stone Forsythe, primarily a left tackle, but he started some right tackle with the injuries there to Lucas over the last year. Or are we going to be talking a week from now about maybe the Seahawks potentially need to look at tackles who may be available? Some other guys that aren't likely to play tomorrow, Draymond Jones still nursing a hamstring, although Coach Macdonald doesn't seem to think that that's serious. Darrell Taylor, also a lower body injury, so that'll give us more time to see Derek Hall, who's been one of the stars of training camp so far, according to some. It'll give us a chance to see Nelson Caesar, undrafted free agent out of Houston, who looked, when he was signed, you watch his tape, his highlights, certainly looks like a guy who has a chance to make this team. Mike Jackson doesn't look like he's going to be out there. He's been nursing an injury, so we'll get to see a lot of those young corners. DJ James, Nehemiah Pritchett out of Auburn, who have flashed over the last week. We'll get to see those guys. We'll see how healthy Reek Woolen is. I don't know if he even played in the mock game last year. I'm not quite sure. Some other things on the offensive side of the ball that I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be watching the running backs. I can't wait to see this because running backs really don't get a lot of buzz in training camp because there's not much they can do without full speed tackling, right? Once the pads go on, the receiver DB matchups become a little bit more legitimate because at least DBs can make plays on the ball. But a running back gets a crease, cuts back, gets to the second level. There's no way of knowing the way the NFL structures practice now with the limitations placed on it, whether he's going to be dragged down for a 4-yard gain or he breaks it and goes to the house. We'll see a little bit more of that on Saturday. It'll be full contact. They're very quick on the whistles. Can't hit the quarterback, of course. But running backs should be able to show us what they can do. Now, I don't know how much we're going to see of Walker and Charbonnet because of, you don't want those guys to get banged up. But we might just get a little glimpse because people have raved about Kenny Walker and how he might be poised to take that next big step and that tandem might turn out to be one of the best young tandems in the league. But we will see a bunch of the young guys, certainly, and maybe it's a chance for redemption for Kenny McIntosh. Drafted last year on day 3 out of Georgia, right? We saw him play for national championships. He was a star of camp until the mock game, and then he hurt his knee, and it didn't seem that serious, didn't require surgery, but it cost him half of the season, ended up lingering, and even when he did come back, never got any run. We never got to see what Kenny McIntosh could do last year. And he didn't really have the opportunity to win that third job or third down back position because DJ Dallas was still on the roster. And so maybe in the exact same place at the same time as the event that cost him his rookie season, essentially, maybe McIntosh has a chance to make a statement tomorrow. Also looking forward to seeing undrafted rookie George Halani out of Boise State, who has been impressing and turning heads in training camp. He's a guy that, again, probably was going to be a draftable player and had a bunch of NFL traits coming out of Boise State, but just had the injury history knocked him down. He ends up going undrafted. We'll talk about some things I want to look for on the other side of the ball up next, but I want to thank BetUS again for sponsoring today's show. They feature live wagering on all major games, the best betting variety in the business, industry-leading customer service, 24/7 customer service. You can also be assigned your own account representative. The Seahawks are currently 4.5-point favorites. Week 1 against the Broncos at Lumen Field. You want to get in on some of that action? It's easy to sign up, and if you click the link down below on the YouTube channel in that pinned comment, BetUS is offering up to a 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000. So get in there, sign up, and get to wagering. On defense, I think all eyes are going to be on, I think eyes will naturally be drawn to Devin Witherspoon and Byron Murphy, right? The two young studs. But let's talk about the inside linebackers, right? Because, let's just recap it. Jordan Brooks, Bobby Wagner, both departing in free agency. The Seahawks' legendary middle linebacker in Bobby Wagner. And then, of course, Jordan Brooks, their first-round draft pick, who they declined his fifth-year option after the ACL injury. They let him leave. He goes to the Dolphins in free agency in a little bit of a trade, essentially, a free agent trade, because then the Seahawks signed Jerome Baker from the Dolphins and Terrell Dodson from the Buffalo Bills. And while there's a lot to like about both those guys, they then proceeded to miss all of the offseason workouts, OTAs, and mini camps with injuries. We knew about Baker's. He was coming off wrist surgery, and I think he had a leg injury also. Dodson's was a little more unexpected. They started out on the PUP list. There was a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of nervousness as we saw John Radigan and fourth-round draft pick Therese Nice Therese Knight, let's hope he's nice, out of UTEP, taking all the first team reps, with Patrick O'Connell as well, last year's undrafted free agent. That was the starting inside linebacker core throughout OTAs and minicamp. But then both Baker and Dodson passed their physicals before day one of training camp, and they've been out there. It's been kind of quiet, right? Haven't heard any raves. But also, again, that's another position, I think, that really how much can you tell? So tomorrow, what I'm going to be looking for is, at least as long as they're out there, is how quick are they to react? How instinctive do they look? Are they playing freely and attacking? Because Mike McDonald said at one point this week that he was a little disappointed in how quickly the defense was diagnosing and relaying the calls and executing the calls pre-snap on defense. And that's why he threw that the mystery session in on Tuesday, where he went 11 on 11, full contact, red zone. Nobody had planned for it. It wasn't on the practice sheet because he just wanted to see how they'd react in a situation that they didn't have any prep for. And so rather than look at things like, coverage skills and taking on blockers, I just want to see what these guys look like off the snap. Does it look like they've processed and really absorbed this Mike McDonald scheme? Certainly it's just one step along the way. The bullets really start to fly as much as they can in the preseason a week from tomorrow when they take on Tennessee. And that'll be after 2 days of joint practices. So we should get a lot more answers next week because we'll have a lot more reporting on it as well. We'll have some beat writers from outside the Seahawks universe. So certainly going to be watching those guys on the inside. Again, I could talk about every position. Yeah, I'm going to be looking at Byron Murphy, see what he does. I'm going to be looking, hopefully Mike Morris is out there. He banged up his elbow. Haven't really heard the latest, but he's had a good camp, and he's a guy that I've really liked for 2 years now. Really want to see what he can do. Those DBs flying around, making plays. The two safeties now, Julian Love locked up long term. And again, by the way, those official contract terms came out this week. And as expected, pretty easy on the salary cap. It's not a true 336. It's not a true $12 million cash outlay every year, if you were concerned about that. It's pretty salary cap friendly. And there's another tipping point before the 2026 season where if they want to move on at that point from Julian Love or restructure his deal again to ease the cap hit in 2026, they can easily do so. But that combination of Rayshon Jenkins, who G. Scott called a bad boy on the show on Monday, and the newly minted Julian Love, as well as Kayvon Wallace, a guy that Scott also said some good things on that trio of safeties. And a lot of you have asked me about Kobe Bryant. And so I'll end on that. He's been an intriguing guy since the day the Seahawks drafted him. Same draft as Reek Woolen, right? They take kind of the floor guy, right, who didn't have the dynamic athleticism, but won the Jim Thorpe Award, best DB in college football, just outstanding productive career at Cincinnati, opposite Sauce Gardner. And then they take Reek Woolen in the same draft. He was just dripping with upside and raw and inexperienced. Bryant was started out as an outside corner, but showed some limitations, being a boundary corner. So they moved him to slot his rookie year. And then last year started to transition him to safety. And I wasn't sure about that move, but man, if you recall some of the plays he made in preseason last year, he answered some questions that I had. Certainly, is he physical enough to play safety? And he was coming up and hitting guys. And so I think that cornerback background and then his ability to be physical, really bullish on Kobe Bryant's future as a safety. Then the Seahawks go out, and now they're locked up for the next 2 years at least with Jenkins and Love, Kayvon Wallace on a 1-year deal. Can Kobe Bryant make a statement for himself? So he's in year 3, so 1 year left on his rookie deal. Can he insert himself into the Seahawks' future plans at safety? So just another guy that I'll be taking a look at. I will be at the game, as I mentioned, taking notes, watching, and then as soon as I get back from the game, I will go live on the YouTube channel, share my observations. Love to get your comments, your feedback. If you plan on going, As long as it takes me to get back from the stadium, kind of transcribe my notes a little bit and go live. So I think they're expecting the mock game to finish up about 2:45. That's the tentative start of some of their post-game festivities they're having there. So roughly, I'm thinking about 4 o'clock Pacific time for the live reaction show. If you want to join me for that, we'll get your comments, questions. We'll stick them on the screen and talk about what we see for the first time at Lumen Field. And then coming up on Monday, Brian Nemhauser, the original Hawk blogger, co-host of Real Hawk Talk, and now a credentialed reporter. He's there every day now at training camp on the sidelines. And so he'll be able to share. He's been on the show before, and he's always had incredible perspective, dating all the way back to before the Pete Carroll days. Tremendous insight, but now he gets to see it from up close, interview players, and we're going to get his thoughts on the mock game and everything he's seen in the 2 weeks of training camp leading up to that point on Monday. Lots of other really cool things planned that I'm working on for next week and beyond as we get into the preseason and get ever closer to September 8th and that home opener against the Broncos. Shout out once again to BetUS for sponsoring this show. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Check the description for all the other ways that you can support the channel. Support my buddy Stephen Douglas and Company. That's the music you hear in the background. His new EP out soon on Spotify. He's got a couple of singles out there. That's going to do it. Let's wrap this up. As always, forever and always, go Hawks. Thank you so much for your support, and thanks for watching the show.